Next set of questions has to do with money. First one is, who pays for church activities?
Well, I think if you looked at Jesus and the 12, you'd see it was a pretty low overhead situation. At one point, they couldn't pay their temple tax. They had to go get money out of a fish's mouth. And other times, like during what's classically called the Last Supper, apparently they had some money accumulated at that point because they thought Judas was going to go off and give some money to the poor. And Judas did have some money, I guess, didn't he? Silver pieces. But in any event, money wasn't something that was a big focal point for them because they were very low overhead. They didn't have a lot of possessions. They didn't, they had a couple swords right at the very end amongst the whole bunch of them, and they didn't take along extra clothes when they traveled, implying maybe they had some. But anyway, it was basically a low overhead situation, and we've really strapped ourselves in, and I say we, speaking as the body of Christ at large, universal, we've made some major blunders by strapping ourselves into big mortgages and advertising budgets and trying to do things in order to accommodate certain things that we'd considered priorities, and in the end making bad decisions. Well, we can't say anything hard, quote, from the pulpit, which that whole thing shouldn't exist anyway, per se. But we couldn't, if it did exist, we couldn't really say hard things because if we alienated some of the well-heeled members, then we wouldn't be able to make our mortgage payment. And we can't decide to send 50% of the people in the church off to another country because then who would pay the building payments and who would pay the salaries and then all this. It's like we've strapped ourselves in with all these Ishmaelic decisions to the point where we have to make bad decisions in order to keep the machine running. Well, as far as money goes, it's certainly true that by the Lord's command, those that labor in the gospel should earn their living from the gospel. Let he who receives instruction in the word share all good things with his teacher. There's certain responsibilities to organically meeting the needs of those that have helped us spiritually. There's as James would say and Peter, for example, said to Paul, just whatever you do, don't forget the poor. You're the apostle of the Gentiles. Whatever you do, don't forget the poor. There's money that needs to circulate and giving that's a part of our lives to lay by in store for certain purposes that God has made us all aware of. And that's a very good mark of where we're at spiritually, is sacrificial giving. If we sow sparingly, we'll reap sparingly. So the giving process and then the utilization of those funds for God's work is all a very biblical idea, but it never was meant to run like Amway or some major corporation, Procter & Gamble or whatever. That was never really God's intent. People pay dues to get in the door. They pay basically for the show. And then the money's put in a budget, and they make a pie chart on Lotus and distribute it to all these different things, budget to take votes and board meetings, and all these business-oriented ways of dealing with things. It was never God's heart or God's intention. And if anybody's doing that kind of stuff, you need to stop. It's not God's heart. It's not God's way. And I know it seems logical, but so did Hagar and Ishmael. And it's not going to bear good fruit. You know yourself, you've already seen it in your own experience, of all the chaos and difficulty that it's brought about in your lives. And I'm asking you to look at your universe a little bit differently. It doesn't have to be that way. God can organically cause people to care for one another's needs. And when there's a need, just like there was in 1 Corinthians 16, we need to pull together funds for a car for a brother and some other folks that are going into Eastern Europe. We can do that on a minute's notice or 6 months' notice, to print things, to do whatever, to care for the needs inside of the church, to care for people around us in the community that aren't saved. All those things can be met by people giving as they've been prospered, laying by in store and then giving to anyone as they had need. From time to time, people selling land and possessions as they see needs arise. Those kinds of things are basic Christian living, but it certainly doesn't demand the religious way that we've handled all those things, the peer pressure. Man, I've known pastors that when the basket's been passed in front of them, They put, even in this city, in a mega church, the pastor would always put an empty envelope in the basket on Sunday morning during the second service, because he already gave in the first service and he didn't want people to think that he wasn't giving in the second service. So he put an empty envelope in the basket in front of everybody so everybody could see his giving and be motivated to do the same thing. And that's hypocrisy. That's manipulation. It's sin. That's not Christianity. But, I remember when that basket used to pass in front of me back, in the olden days, and it's like, I got to run out to the car real fast and get my checkbook. And I was just in a frenzy, and I'd make sure I folded it if I didn't have very much to give, and kind of slide it underneath so nobody would see it. And, it's like all this pressure and tension, all this stuff that is not from God, that we put ourselves in this bind and put others in this bind, and it's not right. It's manipulation and control and trying to accomplish our own agenda, paying our mortgage payments, all this stuff that we've created for ourselves. The salaries, the mortgage payments, all these kinds of things that God never intended in the first place. Paul got no salary. He wrote to the Philippians and he said, you guys used to be the only ones helping me, and then you stopped, and then you renewed it. And, it's like it was an organic thing. And if you look through the book of Acts and through his letters, you see that it was something that people would give as God called them to give. And they were watching and praying and directing it in the direction that seemed best and right to them. So giving is right. The utilization of money is a good thing. But accumulating property for this entity called the church is a bad idea and will cause problems eventually in the working out of life. I mean, it's been a big joke, really, that we've had an average bank account over the last... Actually, we don't even have a bank account for the church, but because it doesn't exist. It's lives. It's neither here nor there. It's within us. We've had an average accumulation of funds at any given time of about zero, for all the years we've been here, because it's like about the time like a bunch of people will just kind of lay it there for utilization as anyone has needs, and 2 days later we find out a major need and it's gone. It's like God had already stirred their hearts to give sacrificially in an illogical way with no known needs, and boom, it was there 2 days later when people needed it. And other times when we've wanted to give a major gift to some folks in other countries or whatever, and it's accumulated for several weeks, and then we find out they have a need, and bang, it's there for them. And that kind of thing, that's really an organic and life-giving and freeing way to handle this thing called money, these finances, this root of much evil in our lives. And it really, I don't have to worry, nobody has to worry about inflationary raises, increases, or merit raises, or it's like that whole concept is so of the world and not of the New Testament. Certainly, we want to give to those that have prospered us spiritually in a material way. Let he who receives instruction in the word share all good things with his teacher. Awesome. By the Lord's command, those that have labored in the gospel should earn their living that way. That's awesome, but it's organic. It's because we love each other, we appreciate each other, and we give as God calls us, and so there's a dynamic. If person X has been able to have most of their needs met by people that appreciate what they've done spiritually for them, and all of a sudden their lives become somewhat less in touch with God and they're not changing people's lives, well then people will stop slipping money under their door, or stop jotting an envelope note to them that this is for this brother or whatever. They'll stop doing that because they're not finding the benefit of life that they were before. And so all of a sudden this guy's got to go make tents. He's got to get a job to support other people that are doing the work of God. And so when it's organic, God can raise up or sit down whenever he pleases. And it's a very beautiful and very freeing and very reasonable thing that everybody learns to walk in faith and obedience to the Spirit's voice rather than some external thing, some guarantees and worldly thinking.